The auctioneer's gavel cracked against the wooden podium like a gunshot, and Arabella Easton felt her stomach drop as she realized she was next on the platform. Her wrists bound with rough hemp rope that had already chafed her skin raw during the 3-day journey from Santa Fe to this God-forsaken town of Oro Grande, New Mexico. It was July 1882, and the summer sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty square where perhaps 100 men had gathered, their faces shadowed by wide-brimmed hats, their eyes calculating as they assessed the merchandise being offered to settle her late father's gambling debts. Arabella stood there in a faded blue calico dress that had once belonged to her mother, her dark auburn hair falling in tangled waves past her shoulders, her green eyes blazing with fury and fear in equal measure. She was 22 years old, educated at a finishing school in Boston before her father had dragged her west 3 years ago with promises of silver strikes and easy fortune. And now she was being sold like livestock because he had bet everything on a pair of queens and lost. "Gentlemen, gentlemen," the auctioneer called out, a thin man with a waxed mustache who kept mopping his brow with a stained handkerchief. "We have here Miss Arabella Easton, age 22, educated, can read and write, skilled in household management and fine needlework. Starting bid is $50 for a 3-year indenture contract." Arabella wanted to spit at him, wanted to scream that she was not property to be bought and sold, but she had learned over the past 3 days that resistance only brought the back of a hand across her face. She stood as tall as she could, lifting her chin in defiance even as her heart hammered against her ribs. The crowd stirred, and a voice rang out from the left side of the square. $50. She turned her head to see who had spoken and felt ice flood her veins. Malcolm Kane stood near the front of the crowd, his bulk impressive in a black suit that must have cost more than most men in Oro Grande earned in a year. He owned the largest ranch in the territory, the Double C, and his reputation preceded him like a thundercloud. Men who crossed him disappeared. Women who worked in his household rarely came to town, and when they did, they wore long sleeves even in summer and kept their eyes downcast. He was perhaps 45 years old, with graying hair and cold blue eyes that looked at Arabella now with naked hunger. $75, another voice called, and Arabella saw a merchant she did not recognize, a portly man with eager eyes. $100, Kane said flatly, his voice brooking no argument. The merchant deflated, shaking his head and stepping back into the crowd. A heavy silence fell over the square, and Arabella felt tears pricking at her eyes despite her determination not to cry. She would not give them the satisfaction. She would not. $100 going once, the auctioneer said, his gavel raised. Going twice, $200. Every head turned to locate the new bidder, and Arabella followed their gazes to see a man stepping forward from the back of the crowd. He was tall and lean, with broad shoulders beneath a worn brown leather vest and a dusty gray shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal sun-bronzed forearms. He wore faded denim trousers and scuffed boots, and a dark brown Stetson sat low on his head, shadowing a face that looked to be in his late 20s. His jaw was strong and clean-shaven, his hair a sun-streaked brown that touched his collar, and when he lifted his head enough for Arabella to see his eyes, she found herself looking into the warmest brown she had ever seen, like honey held up to the light. The crowd erupted in whispers, and Malcolm Kane turned slowly, his face darkening with fury. "Who the hell are you?" The stranger stopped a few feet from the platform, his thumbs hooked in his belt, his posture relaxed despite the tension crackling through the air. "Owen Xavier. I have a horse ranch about 10 miles north of here." "I know who you are," Kane said, his voice dripping with contempt. You are that drifter who bought the old Morrison place 6 months ago. You have got no business here, boy." Owen's expression did not change, but Arabella saw his jaw tighten slightly. "I've got $200 in gold coin and the right to bid same as any man here. You have a problem with that. Take it up with the auctioneer." The auctioneer, looking nervous now, glanced between the two men. "Mr. Kane, the bid stands at $200. Do you wish to counter?" Kane's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "250. 300, Owen said immediately, his eyes never leaving Kane's face. A collective gasp went through the crowd. $300 was an outrageous sum for an indenture contract, more than many men earned in a year. Arabella stared at the stranger, this Owen Xavier, and tried to understand what game he was playing. No one challenged Malcolm Kane in Oro Grande. No one who wanted to keep breathing anyway. Kane took a step toward Owen, and two of his ranch hands moved in from the edges of the crowd, their hands resting on their gun belts. "You are making a mistake, Xavier." "The only mistake I see is a man trying to intimidate his way out of a legal auction," Owen replied calmly. "You want her, you are going to have to pay for her. Otherwise, step aside." The air felt electric, like the moments before a lightning strike. Arabella held her breath, waiting for gunfire, for blood, for the violence that seemed inevitable. But after a long moment, Kane smiled, and somehow that was more terrifying than his anger. "You just made yourself an enemy you cannot afford, boy," he said quietly. $325. Owen did not hesitate. 400. The crowd fell silent. Even the auctioneer looked shocked. Kane stared at Owen for a long moment, his face mottled with rage, and then he laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "You have got 400 in gold, drifter. Show it." Owen reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a leather pouch, which he tossed to the auctioneer. The man caught it, opened it, and his eyes widened as he poured a stream of gold coins into his palm. He counted quickly, his lips moving, and then nodded. $400 in gold eagle coins, Mr. Kane. Do you counter?" Kane stood there, his chest heaving, and Arabella could see the calculation in his eyes. He was a rich man, but $400 was not pocket change, even for him. And more than that, she realized, he had his pride. To keep bidding would make him look desperate, would make him look weak in front of the whole town. "She is not worth $400, he said finally, his voice tight. "But then, a fool and his money are soon parted. Enjoy your purchase, Xavier. I give it a week before she runs off, or you realize what a bad investment you made." He turned on his heel and strode away, his ranch hands following. The crowd began to disperse, the entertainment over, though Arabella could hear them muttering amongst themselves, already spreading the story of what had just happened. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Sold to Mr. Owen Xavier for $400. The indenture contract is for 3 years, as specified by the debtor's agreement. Sign here, sir." Owen stepped up to the platform, signed the papers the auctioneer laid out, and then turned to look at Arabella directly for the first time. Up close, she could see the lines at the corners of his eyes, the weathering of a man who spent his days outdoors, the strength in his hands as he reached for the rope binding her wrists. "May I?" he asked quietly, and she was so surprised by the question, by the courtesy in his voice, that she simply nodded. He pulled a knife from his belt, a wicked-looking blade that gleamed in the sunlight, and cut through the rope with one swift motion. Her hands fell free, and she gasped at the sudden rush of blood back into her fingers, at the stinging pain where the rope had cut into her skin. Owen frowned as he saw the raw wounds circling her wrists. "That is going to need tending." He looked up at her face, and his brown eyes were gentle. "Can you walk, or do you need help?" "I can walk," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. She had barely spoken in 3 days, knowing anything she said would be used against her. "All right, then. My wagon is just down the street. We will get you some water and something to eat, and then we will head to my ranch." He offered his arm as though he were escorting her to a church social, rather than leading away a woman he had just purchased. Arabella stared at his arm, at the courteous gesture, and felt a hysterical laugh bubbling up in her throat. She suppressed it and ignored his arm, stepping down from the platform on her own. If he was offended, he did not show it. He simply fell into step beside her as they walked through the dusty streets of Oro Grande toward a modest wagon hitched to 2 sturdy-looking horses. The wagon bed held supplies, flour sacks and tools and coils of rope, and there was a single bench seat at the front. Owen helped her up onto the seat, again with that careful courtesy that confused her, and then climbed up beside her. He took the reins in capable hands and clicked his tongue, and the horses started forward at a steady walk. They rode in silence through the town and out onto the open road that led north. The landscape around them was harsh and beautiful, mesas rising in the distance painted in shades of red and orange, scrub brush dotting the dry earth. The sky a brilliant cloudless blue that seemed to stretch forever. The heat was intense, and Arabella felt sweat trickling down her back, felt her lips cracking from thirst. As if reading her mind, Owen reached behind the seat and pulled out a canteen. He offered it to her without a word. She took it, her hands shaking slightly, and drank deeply. The water was warm but clean, and it was the best thing she had tasted in days. "Thank you," she said quietly, handing it back. He nodded and took a drink himself before returning it to its place. Another mile passed before he spoke. "I figure you have got questions. And probably some concerns, given what just happened back there. So I will say this straight out. I bought your contract because I needed help at my ranch, and because I was not about to let Malcolm Kane get his hands on you. I saw what happened to his last housekeeper. I will not be party to that happening to another woman." Arabella turned to look at him, studying his profile as he kept his eyes on the road. What happened to his last housekeeper? She disappeared about 4 months back. Her family came looking for her, said she had not written in weeks. Kane claimed she had run off with a drifter, but her things were still at his ranch, including a locket her mother said she never took off. The sheriff would not investigate. Kane owns the sheriff. A chill ran through Arabella despite the heat. "And you think he killed her?" "I think she is not the first woman to disappear after working at the Double C, and I did not want you to be the next." "So you spent $400 to save me?" She heard the skepticism in her own voice. "Forgive me if I find that hard to believe. No one is that altruistic." Owen glanced at her, and there was something like understanding in his eyes. "You are right to be suspicious. Like I said, I do need help at the ranch. I am trying to build up a horse breeding operation, and I have got more work than one man can handle. I need someone to help with the household, the cooking and cleaning, and maybe help with the books if you are as educated as that auctioneer claimed. In return, you will have your own room, 3 meals a day, and I will pay you a wage on top of working off your indenture." "A wage?" Arabella repeated. "Indentured servants do not get wages. On my ranch you will. 50 cents a week to start, more if you prove yourself valuable. That way you will have money of your own when your 3 years are up." He paused. "Or sooner if you want. I will not hold you against your will. You want to leave, you tell me, and I will take you to the nearest town with a stage line." Arabella stared at him, trying to find the trap, the catch in his words. "Why would you do that? You just paid $400 for my contract." "Because you are a human being, not property, and what happened to you back there was an abomination." His voice was hard now, angry in a way it had not been even when facing down Malcolm Kane. "Your father's debts are not your fault, and you should not have to pay for them with years of your life. But since the law says otherwise, I figured the least I could do was give you a better option than what Kane had in mind." They rode in silence for another few minutes while Arabella processed this. Everything about this man confused her. His actions, his words, the way he treated her with respect, despite the fact that he legally owned her labor for the next 3 years. She had been bracing herself for brutality, for assault, for any number of horrors, and instead she found herself sitting beside a man who spoke of wages and choices as though they were her natural right. "Why did you come to Oro Grande?" she asked finally. "You said you bought your ranch 6 months ago. Where were you before that?" "Texas, mostly. I worked cattle drives for about 8 years, saved every penny I could. When I had enough, I started looking for a place of my own. The Morrison Ranch came up for sale at a good price, and I liked the look of the land. Good grazing, a reliable water source, plenty of room to expand. Do you have family?" "Not anymore. My parents died of fever when I was 16. My brother was killed in the war." "I am sorry," Arabella said, and meant it. Owen shrugged. "It was a long time ago. What about you? How did you end up in Oro Grande?" So she told him, haltingly at first and then with growing bitterness, about her father and his gambling, about the way he had squandered her mother's inheritance, and then borrowed from loan sharks who did not take kindly to not being repaid. About how he had been found dead in an alley 3 weeks ago with his throat cut, and how the men he owed had come for her the next day, claiming she was responsible for his debts under territorial law. "They gave me 2 choices," she said, her voice flat. "Work off the debt through indenture, or go to prison for theft. My father had apparently told them I had money hidden away, which was a lie. I had nothing. So I chose indenture, because at least that way I would not be locked in a cell." "That is a hell of a choice to force on someone," Owen said quietly. "It is a hell of a world we live in," Arabella replied. They crested a rise and Owen pointed ahead. "There. That is home." Arabella looked and saw a ranch spread out in a shallow valley, sheltered on 3 sides by low hills. There was a main house built of adobe and wood, single-story but solid-looking, with a covered porch running along the front. Behind it stood a barn, a stable, several outbuildings, and a series of corrals where she could see horses moving. Even from a distance, she could tell they were beautiful animals, well-proportioned and healthy. "You have a lot of horses," she observed. "About 40 head right now, plus the breeding stock. I am specializing in working horses, cow ponies mostly, but I have got a few with racing blood too. The trick is breeding for temperament as much as speed or strength. A horse with a bad temperament is dangerous no matter how fast it can run." There was passion in his voice when he talked about his horses, a warmth that made him seem younger, less guarded. Arabella found herself wanting to hear more, wanting to understand what drove this strange, courteous man, who had just upended his life and hers with a $400 bid. As they drew closer to the ranch, Arabella could see more details. The house was well maintained, the porch swept clean flower boxes under the windows, though the plants in them looked sadly wilted. The barn was freshly painted, the corrals sturdy. It was clear that Owen took pride in his property, that he was building something here. He pulled the wagon up in front of the house and set the brake, then climbed down and came around to offer Arabella his hand. This time she took it, letting him help her down, and felt the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. "Let me show you inside," he said, releasing her hand and leading the way up the porch steps. The interior of the house was sparse but clean. There was a main room with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table and chairs, a few bookshelves lined with well-worn volumes. Through an open doorway, she could see a kitchen with a cast iron stove and a hand pump over a deep sink. 2 other doors led off the main room, both closed. "That is my room," Owen said, pointing to the door on the left, "and that will be yours." He opened the door on the right, and Arabella stepped past him into a small but tidy bedroom. There was a narrow bed with a simple quilt, a chest of drawers, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a window that looked out toward the corrals. It was more than she had expected, more than she had dared hope for. "The previous owner left some clothes in the chest," Owen said from the doorway. "His wife's things. She passed before they sold the place. You are welcome to anything that fits. I will need to go into town in a few days and can pick up anything else you need." Arabella turned to face him, overwhelmed suddenly by the simple kindness of the gesture. "Why are you being so nice to me?" He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I am just treating you like a human being. That should not be remarkable, but it is. In my experience, men like you do not exist. Men like me. Men who keep their word. Men who show courtesy without expecting something in return." Owen was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was soft. "I expect you to work hard and pull your weight, because that is what I do and that is what anyone working on this ranch does. But I do not expect anything else. Your body is your own. Your choices are your own. I need help, not a slave. And for what it is worth, I am sorry for what you have been through. No one deserves that." Arabella felt her throat tighten, felt the tears she had been holding back for days finally begin to fall. She turned away quickly, not wanting him to see her cry, but it was too late. He had already seen. "I will let you get settled," he said gently. "There is water in the pitcher and you will find soap and towels in the top drawer. Take your time. When you are ready, come out to the kitchen and we will have some supper." He pulled the door closed behind him, giving her privacy, and Arabella sank down on the edge of the bed and let herself cry. She cried for her father, despite everything he had put her through. She cried for herself, for the life she had lost, for the future that had been stolen from her. And she cried from relief, because as impossible as it seemed, she had been saved by a stranger with kind eyes and a gentle voice. And for the first time in weeks, she felt something that might have been hope. When the tears finally stopped, she washed her face and hands in the basin, wincing as the water stung her raw wrists. She found a clean cloth and wrapped them as best she could, then took a moment to look through the chest of drawers. There were several simple dresses, all of them well-made if not fancy, and she selected one in a dark green cotton that looked like it might fit. She changed quickly, grateful to be out of the stained calico she had been wearing for days, and tied her hair back with a ribbon she found in another drawer. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Owen in the kitchen, working at the stove. He had removed his vest and hat, and she could see now that his hair was thick and wavy, falling just past his collar. He looked up when she entered and smiled, a quick flash of warmth that transformed his face. "You found something that fits. Good. I was not sure about sizes." "It is a little loose, but it will do fine. Thank you. Sit down. I am just finishing up here." Arabella sat at the kitchen table and watched as he worked. He moved with easy competence, checking a pot on the stove, slicing bread, pouring water from a bucket into 2 glasses. A few minutes later, he set a bowl in front of her filled with beef stew, thick with vegetables and rich with gravy, and a plate with several slices of bread. "It is not fancy, but it is filling," he said, sitting down across from her with his own bowl. Arabella picked up her spoon and took a bite and nearly moaned at the taste. It was the first hot meal she had eaten in days, and it was delicious. She tried to eat slowly, to maintain some dignity, but she was ravenous and the food was too good. Owen ate his own meal in silence, not commenting on her appetite, and she was grateful for that small mercy. When they had both finished, he poured coffee from a pot on the stove and set a cup in front of her. "We should talk about the work I will need you to do," he said, wrapping his hands around his own cup. "Like I said, I need help with the household, cooking, cleaning, laundry, that sort of thing. I have been doing it myself, but it takes time away from the ranch work and I am falling behind. Beyond that, if you can really read and write, I could use help with the account books. I am good with numbers, but the record keeping is tedious and I tend to let it pile up." "I can do all of that," Arabella said. "I ran my father's household for 3 years after we came west. And I am quite good with numbers, actually. I used to help my mother with the accounts when I was younger." "Good. Then here is how we will work it. I will be up at dawn most mornings to tend the horses and handle the ranch work. I would appreciate breakfast ready by the time I come in, usually around 7. Supper around 6 in the evening. The rest of the time, you manage the house and the books as you see fit. Sunday is a rest day. You will not be expected to work except for basic meal preparation." "That seems more than fair. If you need anything, supplies or help with something, you tell me. And like I said before, if you are not happy here, if you want to leave, you tell me that too. I will not hold you prisoner." Arabella studied him over the rim of her coffee cup. "You keep saying that, but I do not understand why. You paid $400 for my contract. Most men would want to ensure they got their money's worth." Owen was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. When he spoke, his voice was low. "When I was 18, I watched my mother be treated like property by men who thought they owned her because my father owed them money. I swore then that if I ever had the means, I would not stand by and let that happen to another woman. So no, I do not see you as property. I see you as a person who got dealt a bad hand, and I am trying to do right by you. If that makes me a fool, so be it." Arabella felt something shift in her chest, some hard knot of fear and anger beginning to loosen. "You are not a fool. You are a good man, Owen Xavier. There are not many of those in this world." He looked embarrassed, a faint flush coloring his cheeks. "I am just trying to live decent. Now, you have had a long few days and you look exhausted. Why do not you get some rest and we will start fresh tomorrow morning?" She wanted to argue, wanted to stay up and talk more, to understand this man who had bought her freedom with $400 in gold and asked nothing in return but honest work. But he was right. She was exhausted, bone deep tired in a way she had not allowed herself to acknowledge. So she nodded and stood, carrying her dishes to the sink. "I will wash those," Owen said. "Go on. Thank you for everything." "You are welcome, Arabella." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it on his lips was strangely intimate. She felt her cheeks warm and ducked her head, hurrying back to her room before he could see her blush. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, her heart beating fast. She was being ridiculous, she told herself. He was just being kind. It did not mean anything. It could not mean anything. He was her employer, the man who held her indenture contract, and any feelings beyond gratitude would be foolish and dangerous. But as she lay down on the narrow bed and pulled the quilt up to her chin, she could not help but remember the warmth in his brown eyes, the gentleness in his voice, the way he had looked at her like she mattered. And for the first time in a very long time, Arabella Easton let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, her life was not over after all. The next morning, Arabella woke to the sound of a rooster crowing and pale dawn light filtering through her window. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was, and then memory flooded back. The auction. Owen Xavier. The ranch. She sat up quickly, heart pounding, and looked around the small room as if to reassure herself it had all been real, It was real. She was here, in her own room, in a bed with clean sheets, wearing a borrowed dress that fit reasonably well. Through the window she could see the corrals and the horses moving in the early morning light, could hear the distant sound of Owen's voice calling to them. She dressed quickly, splashed water on her face, and made her way to the kitchen. The house was quiet, and through the window over the sink she could see Owen out by the barn, forking hay into the corrals. She set about making breakfast, finding eggs in a basket by the door, bacon in the cold cellar, flour and baking powder for biscuits. It felt good to work with her hands, to do something useful after days of helplessness. By the time Owen came in, stamping dust off his boots on the porch, she had breakfast laid out on the table. Scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, fresh biscuits with butter and honey, and a pot of strong coffee. He stopped in the doorway, surprise flickering across his face. "You did not have to do all this on your first morning. You said you wanted breakfast by 7. It is 7. She set a plate in front of the chair he had sat in last night. "Besides, I wanted to. I needed to do something normal." He nodded, understanding in his eyes, and sat down. They ate in comfortable silence, and Arabella was pleased to see him take seconds of everything. When they were finished, he helped her clear the table, and they worked side by side at the sink, him washing and her drying. "I need to ride out and check the fencing in the north pasture today," he said as he handed her a clean plate. "I will be gone most of the morning. Will you be all right here on your own? Of course, I'm not a child." He smiled at that. "No, you are not. But you also just arrived, and I do not want you to feel abandoned. I will be fine. I have plenty to keep me busy." She gestured to the kitchen, which, while clean, showed signs of a man living alone. "This place could use a woman's touch." "I will not argue with that. Just remember what I said. You need anything, or if anything makes you uncomfortable, you tell me." "I will." He left a few minutes later, riding out on a handsome bay gelding, and Arabella set to work. She spent the morning cleaning the house from top to bottom, washing windows and sweeping floors, organizing the kitchen and beating the dust out of the rugs. It was hard work, but it was satisfying, and with each task completed she felt a little more like herself, a little more in control. Around noon, she made herself a simple lunch and ate it on the front porch, looking out over the ranch. It really was a beautiful piece of land, she thought. Harsh, yes, but with its own stark beauty. The horses in the corrals were magnificent, a mix of colors and sizes, all of them moving with grace and power. She was just finishing her meal when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching from the south. She stood, shading her eyes against the sun, and felt her stomach drop as she recognized the 3 riders cantering up the road. Malcolm Kane sat astride a massive black stallion, flanked by the 2 ranch hands who had been with him at the auction. They pulled up in front of the house and Kane dismounted, his cold blue eyes fixed on Arabella. "Miss Easton," he said, his voice oily with false charm. "I thought I might find you here." Arabella forced herself to stand tall to not show the fear coursing through her. "Mr. Kane." "What do you want?" "I came to check on you, to make sure Xavier is treating you well." He stepped onto the porch, too close, invading her space. "After all, we do not really know anything about him, do we? He could be anyone. He could be dangerous. He has been nothing but courteous." "Has he now?" Kane's smile was predatory. "Well, that is good to hear. But you know, if you find yourself unhappy here, if you find that he expects things you are not willing to give, you just send word to me. I would be happy to buy your contract from him. I would take very good care of you." The way he said it, the look in his eyes, made Arabella's skin crawl. "Thank you for your concern, but it is not necessary. I am quite content here." "Are you?" He reached out and ran a finger down her arm, and she jerked away, her back hitting the wall of the house. A woman like you, educated, refined, should not be wasting away on a dirt-poor horse ranch. You should be somewhere comfortable, somewhere you would be appreciated. Get your hands off her." Owen's voice cut through the air like a whip, and Arabella looked past Cain to see him riding up fast, his bay lathered with sweat. He dismounted before the horse had fully stopped and strode up onto the porch, placing himself between Arabella and Cain. "I said get your hands off her. And get off my property." Cain stepped back, his hands raised in mock surrender. "Easy there, Xavier. I was just checking on your investment, making sure you are taking proper care of what you bought. What I bought is none of your concern. And if I catch you on my land again without invitation, I will not be so polite about asking you to leave." The two ranch hands had dismounted as well, and were standing at the base of the porch steps, their hands resting on their guns. Arabella could see the tension in Owen's shoulders, could sense the violence simmering just beneath the surface. Cain looked at Owen for a long moment, then smiled that cold, predatory smile. "You have got guts, Xavier. I will give you that. But guts do not mean much when you are outnumbered and outgunned. You might want to remember that." "Is that a threat?" "Just a friendly observation. Come on, boys. I think we have worn out our welcome." He swung back into his saddle with easy grace, and his men followed suit. As they turned to leave, Cain looked back at Arabella. "The offer stands, Miss Easton. When you get tired of playing house with a drifter, you let me know." They rode off at a canter, dust billowing in their wake. Owen stood watching them until they were out of sight, then turned to Arabella. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "No, I am fine. He just touched my arm, that is all. But Owen, he threatened you." "I know. It is not the first time, and it will not be the last." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "Cain does not like losing, and he does not like being challenged. I should have known he would pull something like this. What are we going to do?" "We are not going to do anything. I am going to keep running my ranch and watching my back, same as I have been doing since I moved here. And you are going to stay close to the house when I am not around. If you see him or any of his men coming, you get inside and lock the doors. Understand?" Arabella nodded, but she felt the fear coiling in her stomach. She had escaped one nightmare only to find herself in the middle of another. "Why does he hate you so much?" Owen sighed and leaned against the porch railing. "Because I would not be intimidated by him. When I first bought this place, he came around and made me an offer. Said he would buy the ranch for twice what I paid, which tells you how much he wants this land. When I said no, he tried threats. When that did not work, he tried sabotage. 3 of my fences have been cut in the last 4 months, and I lost a mare to poisoning last month. I cannot prove it was him, but I know it was. Why does he want your land?" "Water rights. The creek that runs through my property feeds into the Rio Grande. Whoever controls that water controls a lot of the grazing land in this area. Cain already has the biggest ranch in the territory, but he wants more. He always wants more. But if you sell, where would you go?" Owen looked at her, and there was steel in his eyes. "I am not selling. This is my home. I worked too hard and too long to build something of my own to just hand it over to a bully because he wants it. I will fight him if I have to." Arabella understood that determination, recognized it in herself. "Then I will help you. Whatever you need, I will do it." "You do not have to do that. This is not your fight." "Yes, it is. He wanted to buy me yesterday, remember? And he just told me he still wants to. If he is a threat to you, he is a threat to me. We are in this together, whether we like it or not." Owen studied her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like respect. "All right, then. We will watch out for each other. Deal?" He offered his hand, and she took it, feeling the warm strength of his grip. "Deal." They shook on it, and Arabella felt that strange flutter in her chest again, that sense of connection that went beyond mere gratitude. She released his hand quickly, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the way his brown eyes seemed to see right through her. "I should get back to work," she said, her voice a little breathless. "And you probably have things to do as well." "Yeah, I do. But thank you, Arabella, for standing with me. It means more than you know. You saved me from him yesterday. It is the least I can do." He smiled, that warm flash that transformed his face, and then he was gone, heading back to the barn. Arabella stood on the porch and watched him go, her hand still tingling where he had held it, and wondered what on earth she was getting herself into. The days settled into a rhythm. Arabella woke at dawn, made breakfast, and tended to the household while Owen worked the ranch. She cooked and cleaned and did laundry, and in the evenings she worked on the account books, carefully recording expenses and income, noting which horses had been sold and for how much. The numbers told a story of a man building something from nothing, working with slim margins and thinner profits, every dollar accounted for and hard-earned. Owen, for his part, treated her with unfailing courtesy. He never entered her room without knocking, never touched her without permission, never made demands beyond the work they had agreed upon. He was kind and patient and funny in a dry, understated way that caught her off guard. Over supper each evening they talked, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future, the small observations that made up daily life. Arabella learned that he had a gift with horses, that he could gentle even the most skittish animal with patience and a soft voice. She learned that he read voraciously, that the bookshelves in the main room were filled with everything from Shakespeare to technical manuals on horse breeding. She learned that he played a battered harmonica in the evening sometimes, sitting on the porch and filling the air with mournful, beautiful melodies. And Owen learned about her too. About her education back east, about her mother who had died when she was 16, about her dreams of seeing the ocean again someday, about the way she missed music and theater, the cultural life she had given up when her father dragged her west, about how she had loved him despite everything, despite his weaknesses and his failures, because he was her father and she had no one else. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Malcolm Kane did not return to the ranch, but his presence was felt nonetheless. Owen found more cut fences, and one morning 3 of his horses were simply gone, either driven off or stolen outright. He reported it to the sheriff, who promised to investigate and then did nothing. The tension in Owen's shoulders grew more pronounced, and Arabella began to wake in the night, startled by every sound, every creak of the old house settling. But there were good moments, too. Owen taught her to ride, starting her on a gentle mare named Daisy who had the patience of a saint. At first Arabella was terrified, convinced she would fall and break her neck, but Owen was a good teacher, calm and encouraging, and before long she was cantering around the corral with a grin on her face. "You are a natural," he called out, leaning on the fence and watching her. "Another few weeks and you will be racing me." "I doubt that," she laughed, bringing Daisy to a halt beside him. "But it is wonderful. I have never felt so free." She looked down at him from her perch in the saddle, and their eyes met and held. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name, and then Daisy shifted and the spell was broken. "We should get you down before you get saddle sore," Owen said, his voice a little rough. He reached up to help her dismount, his hands firm on her waist, and when her feet touched the ground she found herself standing very close to him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. "Owen," she said softly, not sure what she was asking. He released her and stepped back, clearing his throat. "You did good today. Same time tomorrow. Yes, same time tomorrow. She watched him lead Daisy back to the stable, and her heart was pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the riding. She was falling for him, she realized with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. Falling for this quiet, strong man who had saved her and asked nothing in return but honest work and honest conversation. It was foolish and dangerous and probably doomed, but she could not seem to stop it. That night, over supper, Owen was quieter than usual. Arabella watched him push food around his plate, his brow furrowed, and finally she set down her fork. "What is wrong?" He looked up, startled. "What makes you think something is wrong? You have been brooding for the past hour. Either tell me what is bothering you or stop brooding because it is making me nervous." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Have I mentioned you are remarkably direct?" "Yes, you have. Several times. Now answer the question." He sighed and set down his own fork. "I had a visit from one of my neighbors today while I was in town picking up supplies. Jim Reynolds, good man, honest rancher. He told me he has been approached by some of Kane's men asking questions about me. What I do, where I go, who I talk to. Jim told them to go to hell, but the point is, Kane is escalating. He is not just sabotaging the ranch anymore, he is gathering information. Information for what purpose? I do not know, and that is what worries me. Kane is not a stupid man. If he is digging into my background, he is looking for leverage, something he can use against me." Arabella felt cold dread settling in her stomach. What could he find? Nothing illegal, if that is what you are asking, but I am not from around here and people are suspicious of outsiders. If Kane spins the right story, paints me as some kind of drifter with no ties to the community, it would not be hard to turn sentiment against me. And if the town turns against me, I lose my suppliers, my buyers, everything I have built here. That is not fair. Fair does not enter into it. This is about power and Kane has it, I do not. Arabella reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Then we will have to get you some. Power, I mean. We need to make you part of this community, give you ties that cannot be easily broken. Owen looked down at her hand on his, and when he looked back up at her, his expression was unreadable. What did you have in mind? Go to church on Sunday. Introduce yourself to people. Let them see you as a neighbor instead of a stranger. Help with community projects if there are any. Make friends, build relationships. Make it harder for Kane to paint you as an outsider. That is actually not a bad idea. I have them occasionally, she said dryly, and was rewarded with a laugh. Occasionally, he agreed, his hand turning beneath hers so their palms pressed together. All right, we will try it your way. Sunday we go to church. Of course we. You think I am going alone. You are much better at talking to people than I am. I am your housekeeper. People might think it strange that you bring me to church. Let them think what they want. You are part of this household, part of this ranch, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me. There was a fierceness in his voice that made Arabella's heart skip. He was defending her, claiming her as his, and while she knew he meant it in terms of the household, she could not help but wish he meant it in other ways too. All right, she said softly. Sunday, we will go together. They sat there for a moment longer, hands joined across the table, and then Owen pulled away, his cheeks flushed. I should go check on the horses one more time before bed. Of course, I will clean up here. He left quickly, almost fleeing, and Arabella sat alone at the table, her hand still warm where his had been, and wondered if he felt the same pull she did, the same impossible yearning. Sunday came, bright and hot, and Arabella dressed in her best borrowed dress, a deep blue cotton with tiny white flowers embroidered at the collar. She pinned her hair up carefully, leaving a few tendrils loose to soften her face, and surveyed herself in the small mirror over the washstand. She looked respectable, she decided. Like a woman who had her life together, even if the truth was far more complicated. Owen was waiting for her on the porch, dressed in a clean white shirt and dark trousers, his boots polished to a shine. He had shaved carefully and his hair was still damp from washing. He looked handsome, Arabella thought, with a little flutter in her chest, and when he saw her, his eyes widened. "You look beautiful," he said, and then immediately looked flustered. "I mean, you look nice, respectable. Ready for church." "Thank you," she said, trying not to smile at his discomfort. "You look quite handsome yourself." They took the wagon into town, arriving at the small whitewashed church just as the bells began to ring. People were already filing inside, families in their Sunday best, children running and laughing until their parents called them to order. Arabella felt eyes turning toward them as Owen helped her down from the wagon, felt the weight of curiosity and speculation. "Ignore them," Owen murmured, offering her his arm. "Just smile and be yourself." They walked into the church together, and Arabella was acutely aware of the whispers that followed them, of the heads turning to watch. But Owen kept his head high, guiding her to a pew near the middle, and Arabella followed his lead. The service was simple and earnest, the preacher a young man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a passion for his calling. Arabella found herself relaxing, soothed by the familiar rhythms of hymns and prayers. Beside her, Owen sang in a pleasant baritone, and when their hands brushed reaching for the hymnal, she felt that now familiar spark of connection. After the service, the congregation gathered outside to socialize, and Owen took a deep breath before plunging into the crowd. He introduced himself to everyone he could, shaking hands and making small talk, and Arabella stayed close, offering smiles and polite conversation. Most people were friendly, if a bit reserved, though there were a few who looked at them with clear disapproval. "Mr. Xavier, Miss Easton." The preacher approached them with an outstretched hand. "I am Reverend Thomas Hall. Welcome to our congregation." "Thank you, Reverend," Owen said, shaking his hand warmly. "This is a fine church you have here. We are proud of it. I understand you have the old Morrison place now." "That is right. I am running a horse ranch, breeding working stock mostly." "Good, good. We can always use more honest businessmen in the area." Reverend Hall's eyes were kind behind his spectacles. "And Miss Easton, you are Mr. Xavier's housekeeper, I understand." "I am," Arabella said, lifting her chin slightly. Let him judge her if he wanted, but the Reverend only smiled. "Then he is fortunate to have you. The Morrison place has needed a woman's touch for years. I hope you will both consider joining us regularly. We have a community supper every third Saturday of the month, and we are always looking for volunteers to help with various projects." "We would be happy to," Owen said, and Arabella nodded her agreement. They spent another half-hour mingling, and by the time they climbed back into the wagon, Arabella felt cautiously optimistic. It had gone better than she had feared, and several people had invited them to visit or offered to stop by the ranch. "That was not so bad," Owen said as they headed out of town. "You were right. People seem more friendly when you actually talk to them." "Imagine that," Arabella said, and he laughed. They were halfway home when they saw the smoke, a thick black column rising from the direction of the ranch, visible for miles. Owen's face went white and he snapped the reins, urging the horses into a gallop. Arabella held on to the side of the wagon as they raced down the road, her heart in her throat. As they crested the last hill, the ranch came into view, and Arabella gasped. The barn was on fire, flames shooting from the roof, smoke billowing into the clear sky. Owen pulled the wagon to a halt and leaped down, already running toward the barn. "Get water from the pump," he shouted over his shoulder. "Wet down the house and the other buildings." Arabella jumped down and ran for the hand pump by the house, filling bucket after bucket and dousing the front porch, the walls, anything that might catch a spark. Her arms ached and her lungs burned from the smoke, but she kept working, kept hauling water. Owen had disappeared into the barn, and for a terrifying moment, Arabella thought he was not coming back out. Then she saw him leading horses out, their eyes rolling white with fear, their coats singed. He got them into the far corral and ran back in again and again, until he had evacuated all the horses that were inside. By the time he staggered out for the last time, coughing and covered in soot, the barn was fully engulfed. They stood side by side and watched it burn, knowing there was nothing more they could do. The heat was intense, the roar of the flames deafening. "All the horses?" Arabella asked hoarsely. "All of them," Owen confirmed. "But I lost all my tack, all my tools, months of feed. Everything that was in that barn is gone. But the horses are safe. That is what matters." He looked at her, and there was something raw and vulnerable in his eyes. Yeah, they are safe." They stood there until the barn was nothing but a smoking ruin, and then Owen slowly walked around the wreckage, looking for clues. It did not take him long to find it. A broken lantern, deliberately placed near a pile of hay, the smell of kerosene still heavy in the air. "Cain," he said flatly. "It had to be. We were both gone, at church where half the town could see us, the perfect alibi for us and the perfect opportunity for him. What are we going to do? I am going to report it to the sheriff, even though he will not do anything about it, and then I am going to rebuild." "What else can I do?" Arabella looked at the devastation, at the months of work and investment gone up in smoke, and felt rage building in her chest. "We cannot let him get away with this. We may not have a choice. Like I said, he has power. We do not. Then we get power. We find evidence, something that ties him to this, and we make damn sure everyone in this territory knows what kind of man Malcolm Cain really is." Owen turned to look at her, surprise flickering across his soot-stained face. "Did you just curse?" "I just watched your barn burn down." "I think the situation warrants it." Despite everything, he smiled. "You are something else, Arabella Easton." "So are you, Owen Xavier. Now come on. Let us get cleaned up and go talk to the sheriff, even if it is pointless. We need to make a record of this." The trip to town was grim, and as Owen had predicted, Sheriff Dawson was singularly unhelpful. He took their statement, made a few perfunctory notes, and told them he would look into it, all while making it clear he had no intention of doing any such thing. When Owen mentioned the deliberately placed lantern and the smell of kerosene, Dawson shrugged and said it could have been an accident, vagrants passing through, any number of things. "Or it could have been Malcolm Cain," Owen said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "That is a serious accusation, Mr. Xavier. I would be careful about throwing around names without proof. The proof is in my burned barn. The proof is that your barn burned. That is all I can put in my report." Dawson leaned back in his chair, his meaning clear. "Now, if there is nothing else, I have other matters to attend to." They left the sheriff's office in silence, and Owen's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "That man is on Cain's payroll, no question about it. Then we go over his head. Who is his superior? Who does he report to?" "The territorial marshal, but he is based in Santa Fe, 2 days' ride from here. By the time he could investigate, any evidence would be long gone. Then we gather evidence ourselves. We watch Cain's men, we listen for talk in town, we find someone who will testify about what he does." Owen looked at her, and there was both admiration and concern in his eyes. "This is not your fight, Arabella. You do not have to put yourself at risk for me." "Yes, I do, because you saved me, Owen." You gave me a home and a purpose, and treated me like a human being when everyone else saw me as property. If someone is trying to destroy you, then they are trying to destroy everything you have given me. So yes, this is my fight too." They stood there on the dusty street, facing each other, and for a moment Arabella thought he might kiss her. She could see it in his eyes, the want, the need, the feeling that mirrored her own. But then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "We should get back to the ranch. There is a lot of cleanup to do." The ride home was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, Owen unhitched the horses and got them settled while Arabella went inside to prepare supper. But her mind was not on cooking. It was on Owen, on the danger he was in, on the way her heart had clenched when she thought he might not come out of that burning barn. She was in love with him. There was no point denying it anymore. She was in love with Owen Xavier, and the thought terrified her because what could ever come of it? She was his indentured servant, bound to him for 3 years by law and debt. Any relationship between them would be tainted by that power imbalance, would be suspect in the eyes of the community. And yet, she could not seem to stop her heart from wanting what it wanted. Over the next few weeks, Owen threw himself into rebuilding. He hired 2 men from town to help construct a new barn, working dawn to dusk alongside them. Arabella kept the household running and started making discreet inquiries in town when she went in for supplies. She talked to merchants, to other ranchers' wives, to anyone who might have information about Cain and his activities. What she learned was damning. 3 other ranchers had been driven out of business in the past 5 years. Their properties snapped up by Cain at bargain prices after mysterious accidents or sudden financial troubles. 2 women who had worked at the Double C had disappeared, just as Owen had said, and no one had ever been held accountable. People were afraid of Cain, afraid to speak out against him, but there was a current of resentment running beneath the surface. If someone were to stand up to him, really stand up to him, they would have support. One rancher's wife told Arabella quietly over coffee one afternoon. But it would take someone brave, someone willing to risk everything. Arabella thought of Owen, working himself to exhaustion to rebuild what Cain had destroyed, and knew they had to find a way. Not just for Owen's sake, but for everyone Cain had hurt, everyone he would hurt in the future if he was not stopped. The new barn was nearly finished when Cain struck again. This time it was not fire but theft. Owen woke one morning to find his breeding stallion, a magnificent animal worth at least $300, missing from his corral. The gate had been left open, but there were rope burns on the post that suggested the horse had not simply wandered off. This time, Owen did not bother going to the sheriff. Instead, he saddled his horse and rode out to track the stallion himself. Arabella wanted to go with him, but he refused, saying it might be dangerous and he needed her to stay and watch the ranch. She agreed reluctantly and spent the day in a state of anxious waiting, jumping at every sound. Owen returned just before sunset, exhausted and empty-handed. "I followed the tracks to the edge of Cain's property," he said, slumping into a chair at the kitchen table. "Then they disappeared. Either he has the horse hidden somewhere, or he has already sold it across the territory line." Arabella set a plate of food in front of him, her heart aching at the defeat in his voice. "We will get him back. Somehow we will figure this out. $300, Arabella. That is what that horse was worth. That is almost all the money I have left after rebuilding the barn. If I cannot breed horses, I cannot make a living, and without income I cannot hold on to this ranch. Then we will find another way to make money. We will sell other horses, we will take on extra work, we will do whatever it takes." He looked up at her, and there was something broken in his eyes. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care so much about helping me? The question hung in the air between them, and Arabella knew this was the moment. She could deflect, could give him some reasonable answer about gratitude or duty, or she could tell him the truth. And she was tired of hiding the truth, tired of pretending what she felt was anything less than love. "Because I care about you, Owen," she said quietly. "Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being just my employer and became someone I could not imagine living without. Because when I thought you might die in that fire, I realized that nothing else mattered as much as making sure you were safe." Owen stared at her, his eyes wide. "Arabella, I know it is complicated," she said quickly. "I know there is the indenture contract, and I know people would talk, and I know it might make everything harder. But I cannot keep pretending I do not feel this way. I am in love with you, Owen Xavier, and I needed you to know that." The silence stretched between them, and for a horrible moment, Arabella thought she had made a terrible mistake. Then Owen stood, his chair scraping against the floor, and in 3 long strides he was in front of her. He cupped her face in his hands, his calloused thumbs brushing her cheeks, and when he spoke his voice was rough with emotion. "I have been in love with you since the moment you stood on that auction platform with fire in your eyes, refusing to be broken. I wanted to tell you 100 times, but I thought it was not fair, not with the contract, not with everything you had been through. But God, Arabella, I love you. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you make me want to be a better man." And then he was kissing her, and Arabella felt like she was drowning in the best possible way. His lips were warm and gentle at first, asking permission, and when she kissed him back the gentleness gave way to hunger. She wound her arms around his neck, pressed herself against him, and poured everything she felt into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want to court you properly, give you everything you deserve." "But the contract, burn it," Arabella said fiercely. "I do not care about the contract. I am here because I want to be, because I choose to be, with you. I cannot just burn it. It is a legal document. If I do not honor it, the men your father owed could come after you again. Then we will pay them off. How much does it take to buy out the contract?" Owen hesitated, then named a figure that made Arabella's stomach drop. It was not impossible, but it was substantial, more than they had on hand. "Then we will work for it," she said firmly. "We will save every penny, and we will buy out that contract, and then we will be free to be together without any shadows between us." Owen smiled, that warm, transforming smile that she had come to love. "You make it sound so simple." "Maybe it is simple. Maybe we are the ones making it complicated." He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise rather than a question. "All right. We will do it your way. We will work, we will save, and we will buy your freedom. And then I am going to marry you, Arabella Easton, if you will have me." "Is that a proposal?" "It is a statement of intent. The proposal comes when I have a ring and you are free to say yes without any doubts." Arabella laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "I am holding you to that, Owen Xavier." They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other as the last light faded from the sky. And for the first time since the auction, Arabella allowed herself to believe in a future that was not defined by debt and obligation, but by love and choice. The next few months were hard but good. Owen and Arabella worked side by side, running the ranch and carefully hoarding every penny they could spare. Arabella took in sewing and mending from women in town, adding her earnings to their growing fund. Owen sold horses and took on breaking contracts, taming wild horses for other ranchers. Slowly, painfully slowly, the amount they needed began to seem achievable. Cain continued his campaign of harassment, but they weathered it together. More fences were cut, supplies went missing, and there were nights when riders circled the ranch house. close enough to be heard but never close enough to be identified. Owen bought a rifle and taught Arabella to shoot, and they took turns keeping watch. It was exhausting and frightening, but it also brought them closer, forging a partnership built on trust and mutual respect. In late October, nearly 4 months after the auction, Arabella was in town picking up supplies when she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. 2 of Kane's ranch hands were in the general store, talking in low voices near the back, not realizing she was on the other side of a tall shelf. "Boss says it is time to finish it," one of them said. "Xavier has been too stubborn for too long. This weekend, when he is at the community supper, we go in and clear out the rest of his horses. Sell them across the border in Colorado. Without his breeding stock, he is finished. What about the woman? Boss does not care about her. Once Xavier is ruined, she will come around. They always do when they got no other options." Arabella stood frozen, her heart pounding. This was it. This was the evidence they needed, the admission that would tie Kane directly to the harassment. But it was also a plan, and if she and Owen did not stop it, they would lose everything. She finished her shopping quickly and drove the wagon back to the ranch at a breakneck pace. She found Owen mending a corral fence and called out to him breathlessly. "I heard them. Kane's men. They are planning to steal all the horses this weekend, during the community supper." Owen set down his tools, his face grim. "Did they see you?" "No, they were talking at the back of the store. They had no idea I was there." "Good, then we have the advantage. They think we do not know." He paced for a moment, thinking, "We need witnesses. If we catch them in the act with credible witnesses, even the sheriff will have to do something. Who can we trust? Jim Reynolds, for one, and Reverend Hall. Maybe a few others from the church who have been friendly. If we can get them here Saturday night, hidden and ready to watch, we can catch Kane's men red-handed. It is risky. If they realize it is a trap, they might come armed. I know, but it is our best shot, maybe our only shot." They spent the next few days carefully reaching out to people they trusted, explaining the situation and asking for help. To Arabella's surprise, everyone they asked agreed. Jim Reynolds brought 2 other ranchers who had grievances against Kane. Reverend Hall brought the town doctor, a man known for his integrity. By Saturday evening, they had 8 men hidden in the shadows around the corrals, all armed and ready to bear witness. Owen and Arabella made a show of leaving for the community supper in town, taking the wagon and making sure they were seen by several people. But instead of staying, they circled back and hid in the house, watching through darkened windows. 2 hours after sunset, just as the men had said, 4 riders approached the ranch. Arabella recognized 2 of them as the men she had overheard in the store. They dismounted and moved toward the corrals, rope and saddles in hand, clearly intending to make off with as many horses as they could. Owen waited until they had opened the corral gate and were inside with the horses, and then he stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. "That is far enough, boys. You are trespassing on my property with intent to steal. Drop your weapons and put your hands up." The 4 men froze, then reached for their guns. But before they could draw, Jim Reynolds and the others stepped out of the shadows, their own weapons trained on the thieves. "You heard him," Jim called out. "Drop your guns and put your hands up, or this ends badly for you." Outnumbered and outmaneuvered, the men had no choice but to comply. Owen kept them covered while Arabella ran to fetch the rope, and together they bound the 4 men securely. "Who sent you?" Owen demanded, though they all knew the answer. The men stayed silent, but it did not matter. Reverend Hall stepped forward, his face stern. "I heard these men planning this theft 3 days ago, and I am willing to testify to that in a court of law, as are all the men here tonight." One of the thieves, The older of the two Arabella had overheard, spat on the ground. "Cain will have your heads for this. Cain is finished," Owen said flatly. "And if you are smart, you will testify against him in exchange for leniency. Otherwise, you are looking at prison time for attempted theft and conspiracy." The man's face went pale, and he looked at his companions. After a long moment, he nodded. All right, I will testify. Cain paid us to harass you, to steal your stock, to drive you out. He has been doing it to ranchers all over the territory for years." "Why?" Reverend Hall asked. "Land, water rights, power, take your pick. He wants to control everything from here to the border, and he does not care who he has to ruin to get it." Owen looked at Jim Reynolds. "Can you and the others stay here with these men while I ride to Santa Fe? I need to bring the territorial marshal back with me." "We will keep watch," Jim promised. "You go do what you need to do." Owen turned to Arabella. "I need you to stay here too. Keep the ranch running. Keep yourself safe. I will be back as soon as I can." "Be careful," she said, gripping his hand. "Cain will not go quietly, I know. But we have right on our side, and that has to count for something." He kissed her quickly, in front of all the witnesses, and Arabella felt her cheeks flush. But she kissed him back, not caring who saw, and when he rode off into the night on his fastest horse, she stood on the porch and watched until he was out of sight. The next 3 days were tense. The men rotated guard duty, and Arabella kept everyone fed and organized. On the second day, Malcolm Cain himself rode up to the ranch, his face twisted with fury. "Where are my men?" he demanded. Jim Reynolds stepped forward, his rifle cradled in his arms. "Your men are being held as witnesses to their own crimes. Owen Xavier has gone to fetch the territorial marshal. I suggest you get yourself a good lawyer, Cain, because your days of terrorizing this territory are over." Cain's eyes blazed, and for a moment Arabella thought he might try something violent, but he was outnumbered and he knew it. He wheeled his horse around and rode off at a gallop, and Arabella let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Owen returned on the 4th day with Territorial Marshal Joseph Harrison, a hard-faced man in his 50s with a reputation for fairness and integrity. He took statements from everyone involved, examined the bound prisoners, and then rode with a posse to the Double C. What they found there was damning. Evidence of stolen property from multiple ranches, including Owen's breeding stallion, which was found hidden in a back pasture. Records that showed Cain had been systematically buying up land from desperate ranchers at a fraction of its value. And most damning of all, a grave behind the bunkhouse that held the remains of the missing housekeeper, the woman whose family had come looking for her months before. Malcolm Cain was arrested and taken to Santa Fe to await trial. With the weight of the evidence against him, he was eventually convicted of theft, fraud, and murder. He was sentenced to hang, and the sentence was carried out in the spring of 1883. With Cain gone, Oro Grande began to change. The ranchers he had driven out began to return, filing claims for restitution. The sheriff was removed from office for corruption, and a new man, honest and competent, was appointed. Jim Reynolds and the other ranchers who had helped Owen became close friends and allies, building a community based on mutual support rather than fear. For Owen and Arabella, the end of Cain's reign meant freedom in more ways than one. With the reward money from the marshal for Cain's capture, Owen was able to buy out Arabella's indenture contract completely. She was free, truly free, for the first time since her father's death. On a cool morning in November, exactly 6 months after the auction, Owen took Arabella riding out to a high meadow that overlooked his ranch. Their ranch, she was learning to think of it, because he made it clear that everything he had was hers as well. They dismounted and stood looking out over the valley, at the new barn that had been built, at the horses grazing peacefully in the corrals, at the house that had become their home. "I have been thinking," Owen said, his voice nervous in a way she rarely heard. "About what I said back in the summer, about my intentions." Arabella turned to look at him and found him holding a small velvet box. Her heart began to race. "The contract is paid off," he continued. "You are free to go anywhere you want, do anything you want. But I am hoping, if you still feel the same way you did then, that you might want to stay here with me, as my wife." He opened the box, and inside was a simple gold band set with a small but beautiful sapphire. "It was my mother's," he said. "The only thing of hers I have left. I would be honored if you would wear it." Arabella felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I will marry you, Owen Xavier. There is nothing I want more." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and Arabella felt like she was home, truly home, for the first time in her life. They were married a month later in the little whitewashed church in Oro Grande, with half the town in attendance. Reverend Hall performed the ceremony, and Jim Reynolds stood up as Owen's best man. Arabella wore a dress that the women of the church had helped her sew, white lace over blue silk, and she carried wildflowers that Owen had picked that morning. When Reverend Hall pronounced them husband and wife, Owen kissed her in front of everyone, and the church erupted in applause. They walked out into the winter sunshine as Mr. and Mrs. Xavier, and Arabella had never felt so happy, so complete. The years that followed were good ones. The horse ranch prospered, with Owen's reputation for breeding quality stock spreading throughout the territory. Arabella managed the business side, keeping the books and handling correspondence with buyers, and together they built something neither could have achieved alone. They expanded the ranch, bought more land, built a bigger house with a proper kitchen and a parlor for entertaining. They hosted the community supper at their ranch one summer, and Arabella baked pies while Owen barbecued beef, and they danced under the stars with their neighbors and friends. In the spring of 1884, Arabella discovered she was pregnant. Owen was over the moon, alternating between fierce protectiveness and giddy excitement. He built a cradle with his own hands, sanding it smooth and carving their initials into the headboard. Their son was born in December, a healthy boy with his father's brown eyes and his mother's auburn hair. They named him Thomas, after Reverend Hall, who had married them, and he was welcomed into the community with love and celebration. Arabella spent her days caring for Thomas and managing the household and the business, and she had never been so exhausted or so happy. Owen was a devoted father, carrying his son around the ranch, talking to him about horses and showing him the land that would one day be his. 2 years later they had a daughter, Catherine, named for Arabella's mother. She was a spirited child with green eyes and a stubborn streak that reminded Owen of Arabella on that auction platform. He said it often, teasing his wife about how their daughter had inherited her fire. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Owen became known throughout New Mexico territory as one of the best horse breeders around, and buyers came from as far as Texas and Colorado to purchase his stock. Arabella published a small guidebook on ranch management that was praised for its practical advice and clear writing. They were respected members of their community, known for their generosity and their willingness to help neighbors in need. In 1889, when Thomas was 5 and Catherine was 3, Arabella found herself pregnant again. This time it was twins, 2 more boys that they named James and William. The house was chaos and noise and laughter, and Arabella would not have changed it for anything. Owen added on to the house again, building more bedrooms and a larger dining room to accommodate their growing family. They hired help for the ranch and the household, treating their employees the way Owen had treated Arabella all those years ago, with respect and fair wages and kindness. On warm summer evenings, Owen would sit on the porch with his harmonica, playing soft melodies while Arabella rocked the twins and Thomas and Catherine played in the yard. These were the moments she treasured most, the simple domestic peace that had seemed impossible during those dark days after the auction. One evening, when the children were finally in bed and the house was quiet, Arabella and Owen sat together on the porch swing he had built, watching the sun set over their land. "You ever think about that day?" Owen asked quietly. "The auction?" "Sometimes," Arabella admitted. "Not as often as I used to. But yes, sometimes I think about it, about how terrified I was, how certain I was that my life was over. I am sorry you had to go through that. Do not be. If I had not, I never would have met you. I never would have found this life, this family. Everything I have now came from that moment, as awful as it was." Owen took her hand, his thumb rubbing over her wedding ring. "I love you, Arabella Xavier. I loved you then, standing on that platform with fire in your eyes, and I love you now, surrounded by our children and the life we built together. You made me want to be brave, want to fight for something worth having. And you saved me," Arabella said softly. "In every way a person can be saved. You gave me hope when I had none, gave me a future when I thought I had lost everything. You showed me what love could be, what it should be. You are my home, Owen. You always will be." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and they sat together as the stars came out, counting their blessings and planning their tomorrows. The children grew, and the ranch grew with them. Thomas showed his father's gift with horses, spending every spare moment in the stables. Catherine inherited her mother's head for numbers and began helping with the books as soon as she was old enough. The twins were a matched pair of mischief and laughter, keeping everyone on their toes. In 1895, when Thomas turned 11, Owen began teaching him the business in earnest, explaining bloodlines and training methods, showing him how to judge conformation and temperament. Arabella watched them together, her husband and her son, and felt her heart swell with pride and love. That same year, Reverend Hall retired, and at the farewell party the community threw for him, he pulled Arabella aside. "I wanted to tell you," he said, his eyes kind behind his spectacles, "what an inspiration you and Owen have been. When you first came to our church all those years ago, there were people who were ready to judge, ready to condemn. But you proved them all wrong. You built a life based on love and hard work and integrity, and you made this community better for being part of it." "Thank you, Reverend," Arabella said, tears pricking at her eyes. "That means more than you know. God has a way of bringing good from even the darkest situations. Your story is proof of that." As the years turned to decades, Owen and Arabella grew old together. Their children grew up and started families of their own, though all of them stayed close, building homes on the ranch land and continuing the family business. Thomas took over the day-to-day operations of the breeding program, while Catherine managed the finances and expanded their reach to markets back east. In 1910, on their 28th wedding anniversary, Owen and Arabella stood on that same high meadow where he had proposed, looking out over a ranch that now sprawled across thousands of acres and supported not just their family but dozens of employees and their families as well. "We did good, did we not?" Owen said, his hair now more silver than brown, his face lined with the years but his brown eyes still warm and kind. "We did better than good," Arabella replied, leaning against him. "We built something that will last, something that matters, and we did it together." I would not have wanted to do it with anyone else." They stood there until the sun set. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had loved each other through hardship and danger, and built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. When they finally returned to the house, they found it full of family. Thomas and his wife Mary with their 3 children, Catherine and her husband Frank with their 2. The twins, both married now with children of their own. The house rang with laughter and conversation and love. And as Arabella looked around at the family they had created, at the life they had built from the ashes of that terrible day in Oro Grande, she knew that every moment of struggle, every challenge they had faced, had been worth it. She caught Owen's eye across the crowded room, and he smiled at her, that same warm smile that had captured her heart so many years ago. She smiled back, and in that moment, everything was perfect. They lived many more years together, growing old in the home they had built, surrounded by children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. When Owen passed peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1918, at the age of 64, Arabella held his hand and whispered her love, thanking him for the life he had given her, for the man he had been. She joined him 2 years later, dying quietly in the same bed where they had slept together for nearly 40 years. Her children buried her beside Owen on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree they had planted together in their first year of marriage. The ranch continued, passed down through the generations, the story of Owen and Arabella becoming family legend. How a cowboy had saved a woman from a cruel fate, how they had fought together against injustice, how they had built an empire based on love and trust and hard work. And sometimes, on quiet summer evenings, when the wind blew just right across the New Mexico landscape, people swore they could hear the sound of a harmonica playing on the porch of the old Xavier ranch house, a melody both mournful and joyful, a reminder that true love, once found, never truly ends. Their great-great-grandchildren would sit on that same porch decades later, watching the horses graze in the corrals, and they would tell the story again. How she had been auctioned to the highest bidder, how a cowboy had outbid the cruel ranch owner and won her trust, and eventually her heart. How from that dark moment had come light and love, and a family that stretched across generations. It was a story worth remembering, worth retelling, a testament to the power of courage and compassion in a hard land during a hard time. And it was true, every word of it, from the auction in Oro Grande to the life they built together to the love that sustained them through all the years between. That was the legacy of Owen Xavier and Arabella Easton Xavier. Not just the land or the horses or the business they built, but the proof that even in the Wild West, in a time of violence and injustice, love could triumph, hope could endure, and two people brave enough to reach for happiness could find it, hold it, and build something beautiful that would last forever.